It's honestly kind of crazy to say this, but the Switch 2 is now a year old. 12 months ago, Nintendo launched what was arguably the most anticipated console since the original Nintendo Switch. And unlike most console launches, this wasn't Nintendo trying to recover from failure. This wasn't the Wii U situation or the GameCube situation. This wasn't the company desperately trying to win people back. Nintendo were coming off of one of the most successful consoles ever made. The original Switch sold over 150 million units. Mario Kart became a cultural phenomenon. Breath of the Wild changed open world game design forever, and Animal Crossing practically carried people through a global pandemic. Nintendo wasn't trying to save itself. Nintendo was trying to follow up on one of the greatest success stories gaming has ever seen. 1 year later, I think we're finally starting to understand what the Switch 2 really is, and more importantly, what Nintendo's future looks like, because after a year of using this thing, buying games for it, watching Nintendo's strategy unfold, and seeing how the industry has reacted, I think Nintendo finds itself in a fascinating position. They're actually winning, but they're also facing challenges they haven't faced in years, and some of those challenges are entirely self-inflicted, because after 1 year on the market, the Switch 2 has done something very few consoles managed to do. It's lived up to the hype, but the real question is whether it can keep doing that. Let's start with the biggest surprise. Nintendo actually showed restraint, and if you followed Nintendo long enough, you understand why that's shocking. Historically, Nintendo has a habit of taking a successful idea and immediately doing something weird with it. The Wii becomes the Wii U, the DS becomes a 3DS, the GameCube becomes the Wii. And for those who didn't know, the Wii is basically a GameCube with motion controls. The tech specs didn't really improve that much. Nintendo loves reinvention. Sometimes it works, sometimes it absolutely doesn't. But this time, they looked at the Switch and said, what if we just made it better? And honestly, that was exactly the right decision. The Switch 2 is bigger, more powerful, better built, the screen is improved, the controllers are improved. The overall experience feels more premium. It's not revolutionary, it's evolutionary, and for once that's exactly what people wanted. Nintendo didn't need another gimmick, the Switch itself was already the gimmick, they just needed to refine it. And they actually did. I think people forget just how old the original Switch had become. Towards the end of its life, that hardware was fighting for its life. Developers were performing actual wizardry to get modern games running. Every Digital Foundry video felt like a medical examination. The conversation wasn't, does it look good? It was more like, can it survive? Or resolution drops, frame rate issues, long load times, visual compromises everywhere. The original Switch was beloved, but by the end, it was exhausted. The Switch 2 fixed that almost overnight. Suddenly, developers had breathing room. Nintendo's own games looked cleaner, third-party games looked dramatically better, and the system felt modern again. And here's the thing, Nintendo never needed the most powerful hardware. It just needed hardware that wasn't actively holding developers hostage. The Switch 2 finally gave them that. But let's be honest, nobody buys Nintendo consoles because of hardware specs. Nobody is rushing to a store because they've heard about improved memory bandwidth. People buy Nintendo consoles for games, and this is where the Switch 2's first year really succeeded, because Nintendo understood something many companies seem to forget. The launch doesn't end after launch day. You need momentum. You need reasons for people to keep talking about your platform, and Nintendo absolutely delivered that. Let's start with Mario Kart World, because this game was unbelievably important. Mario Kart 8 became one of the best-selling games ever made. Now think about that, not one of Nintendo's best-selling games, but one of gaming's best-selling games. Period. Following that up was an impossible task, but somehow Nintendo managed it. Mario Kart World wasn't just another Mario Kart, it actually felt ambitious. The larger environments, the expanded multiplayer, visual upgrades, the sense of scale, and the exploration mechanics. It felt like Nintendo genuinely wanted to push the franchise forward rather than simply release Mario Kart 9 and print more money. And that's what made it special. For millions of people, Mario Kart World became the reason to buy a Switch 2. It instantly demonstrated what the hardware could do. Every successful console needs that game. The game where people see it and immediately understand the purchase. Mario Kart World was exactly that. Then there's Donkey Kong Bonanza, my personal favourite Switch 2 game. I don't think many people expected this game to become one of the defining titles of the Switch 2's first year. For years, Donkey Kong felt weirdly underutilized. Everyone loved Tropical Freeze, everyone loved the Donkey Kong Country games, but Nintendo often treated the franchise like a supporting act. Bonanza changed that. Suddenly, Donkey Kong was back in the spotlight. The destruction mechanics looked incredible, the movement was satisfying, and the worlds were creative, and most importantly, it looked fun. Really, really fun. And that might sound like a ridiculous compliment, but look around the industry. How many games today prioritize looking fun over looking cinematic? Nintendo still understands that. You watch Bonanza and your immediate thought is, I want to play that. Not watch it or admire it, but play it. That's Nintendo's superpower. Something else Nintendo deserves credit for, the transition from Switch to Switch 2. Because unlike many console launches, it never felt like you were abandoning your old library. Suddenly Breath of the Wild looked better, Tears of the Kingdom looked better, old Switch games benefited from stronger hardware, and that mattered a lot. Because when people bought a Switch 2, they weren't buying into an empty ecosystem, they were buying into nearly a decade of incredible software. That's a huge advantage. One of the biggest reasons console launches often struggle is because people spend hundreds of pounds on hardware, then realise there are only 3 games worth playing. The Switch 2 never had that problem. This is the biggest compliment I can give Nintendo. There always seemed to be another direct, another game announcement, another release, another reason people were talking about Nintendo. In today's industry, that's incredibly difficult. Attention spans are shorter than ever, yet Nintendo somehow kept itself in the conversation all year long. And that's why the first year felt successful, not because every game was a masterpiece or every decision was perfect, but because Nintendo maintained momentum, and momentum is everything. Now with that said, I understand why some people think the first year wasn't quite perfect because Nintendo created an impossible standard. The original Switch launched with Breath of the Wild, one of the greatest games ever made. How do you follow that up? Seriously, how would you follow that game up? Most companies were killed to make one game that influential. Nintendo accidentally made people expect a generation-defining masterpiece every single time they launched a game. That's not realistic, and because of that, some people viewed the Switch 2's first year as slightly underwhelming. What amazes me is how Nintendo continues succeeding while ignoring almost every modern gaming trend. Everyone else is chasing live service games. Nintendo is not. Everyone else is chasing subscriptions, but Nintendo isn't. Everyone else is chasing photorealistic graphics, and yet they keep winning. Why? Because they understand something many publishers have forgotten. People buy games because they're fun. It's such a simple concept, but the industry constantly overcomplicates it. Nintendo does not, and that's become one of its greatest strengths. Now here's where things get interesting, because I do have concerns, not about the hardware of the games, or even about Nintendo itself, but specifically complacency, because success can be dangerous. When you spent years dominating the market, it's easy to start believing every decision you make is correct. And lately, I've noticed signs of Nintendo becoming a little too comfortable pricing-wise. Online services, certain remasters, certain upgrade paths, occasional value concerns. There have been moments where Nintendo looked less like the lovable underdog and more like a company fully aware that its audience will buy almost anything. And that's dangerous because goodwill is easier to lose than people think. Another major success story has been third-party support. For years, Nintendo fans accepted compromises. Either you didn't get a game at all, or you got a heavily downgraded version. But now things are changing. Publishers actually want to support the platform. Developers have enough power to make meaningful ports, and suddenly Nintendo feels like part of the wider gaming conversation once again. That's absolutely huge, because one of the original Switch's biggest weaknesses wasn't Nintendo games, it was everything else. The Switch 2 is finally solving that problem. Here's the part I find fascinating. Nintendo may have accidentally exposed the rest of the industry. Think about it, while competitors spend hundreds of millions chasing trends, Nintendo releases games people actually buy. While competitors close studios, Nintendo expands. While competitors obsess over engagement metrics, Nintendo focuses on making fun games. The Switch 2's success isn't just good news for Nintendo, it's a reminder that much of the gaming industry might be overthinking everything. And this is where the real test begins, because the honeymoon phase is over, the novelty is gone, and the launch excitement has faded. Now Nintendo has to prove this isn't just a better Switch, it has to prove it's the foundation for the next decade. Can Nintendo maintain momentum? Can they continue delivering major games? Can they justify their pricing? Can they avoid complacency? And can they keep third parties invested? The answers to those questions will determine whether the Switch 2 becomes merely successful or genuinely legendary. If I have one concern moving forward, it's predictability. The original Switch felt revolutionary, the Switch 2 feels evolutionary, and that's fine for now, but eventually Nintendo will need another big idea, another surprise, another leap, because Nintendo's greatest strength have never been power. It's never been graphics, it's never been online services, it's always been imagination, and I'd hate to see them lose that. So after 1 year, where do I stand on the Switch 2? I think it's a huge success. The hardware is better, the software lineup is stronger, Mario Kart World helped define the launch, third-party support improved, the ecosystem feels healthier, and Nintendo continues to do something many publishers struggle with: make games people genuinely want to play. But I also think we're entering the most important phase of the console's life. The first year is over, now Nintendo has to prove it can sustain this momentum, because that's the difference between a successful console and a legendary one. And if history has taught us anything, it's never a good idea to bet against Nintendo. Every time people think they've figured them out, they surprise us. The question is whether they still have one more surprise left, and over the next few years, we're going to find out. If they do, the Switch 2 could become one of the greatest success stories in gaming history, but if they don't, this first year may end up being the high point. And that's a conversation I don't think enough people are willing to have right now. I do appreciate you guys watching though. If you did like it and you found it insightful, leave a like, maybe even a sub, and I'll see you guys in the next one.